Hello and welcome back. At this point, you've added all the different parts of your teapot and all the different parts of your animal. So you've got a detailed face, you've got a handle, you've got appendages, a spout that's going to function beautifully, and you're ready for the last functional part of your teapot, which is the lid. The lid is a pretty technical thing to add to your vessel, so you're going to need to take your time, potentially pause this video often in the process of learning how to make the lid and making it yourself, and take the time to make it right. You don't want it too small where you can't get liquid in and out. You don't want it so big that liquid pours out of it. You need to make sure that the lid fits well into the hole that it goes into, and that you build what we call a flange. And I'm going to teach you about that in this demo video. It's a little shelf inside the hole the lid sits into that holds the lid in place. Pay attention to how I build that. Pause often in the process, and if you need to rewatch sections, but it's a really important part of the function of a lid. Take your time, be careful, and try to have some fun along the way. Okay, let's talk lids. I am ready to add a lid to my frog. I have finished kind of cleaning everything up. I've got all the major parts there, including I've added eyes, the little ears. I've got details left to do, like toes and the structure of the ear and petals on my flower and texture, but I've got major structures are all present. So I'm ready to do the lid at this point. I drew in the shape that I want the lid to be. Now you want to get your lid as big as you can on the pot that you have. This is a pretty small lid. If you look, it's about 2 inches tall by 1 inch wide. I wouldn't get any smaller than this, okay? If you can get bigger, go bigger. If I go bigger than this, it's going to interfere with the functionality of this once water is added. You draw on that lid first, then we're going to cut it out, and we're going to work on making something called a flange. So I'm going to show you another teapot that I've made to show you what a flange looks like. So here's my mouse. Here's my mouse's lid. It's got a lid pull and a flange. That's this little shelf here on the inside of the pot and this little ledge here on the bottom of the lid. This is the flange. So we're going to build a shelf on the inside of our pot, on the belly itself, and we're going to make a little kind of tab on the bottom of the lid. And what that does is it makes sure that that lid doesn't fall off. If I tip this a little bit, the lid's not going to want to slide off or move around on me. That is the flange. Once you've got the shape of your lid drawn in, make sure it's exactly where you want it. You're going to take a sharp tool. I'm going to use this kind of arrow-headed sgraffito tool, and you're going to cut that lid down and in. And I'm going to suggest that you cut it like you're cutting a pumpkin's top out, so at a slight inward angle. You want to do one nice solid cut all the way around. Once you've done that cut, and the reason that we do that inside angle is so the lid doesn't fall in, you're going to try to lift that lid out. So I've got my lid lifted out. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to recut this inside section so it's straight down, trying not to let clay fall into the interior of my pot. Notice I'm not cutting it wider, I'm just straightening it out. I'm going to clean up this edge a little bit with my finger. And then, since I've got my teapot open, I'm going to work on kind of cleaning up the inside of this teapot before I work on making my flange. Be careful in that step to not stretch out the hole for the lid here. The next thing I want to do on the lid itself is clean this up. So I'm going to trim off the excess on the bottom. You want it to be, that's about a 1/2 inch thick, a little less than a 1/2 inch thick. And you want it to all be the same thickness there, okay, so it's even. I'm going to smooth that out. And then I'm going to put this someplace that I don't forget it's my lid and smush it. I always have one student or myself that at some point in this process thinks this lid is just an extra piece of clay, and I mush it up, or they mush it up and put it with other clay, and they lose their lid, and that is not ideal. So make sure you put this someplace where you hopefully won't treat it as excess clay. All right, next step, I'm going to build my shelf in my belly. Okay, remember the belly is like a shelf. Okay, we need to make a little shelf for this lid to sit down into. So what I am going to do is I'm going to take and make a coil. I want it to be rather thin. You can kind of see the size of it here. And I'm going to lay that coil in sections into the interior of this lid hole. You want this to be down just a little bit from the top. So you're making a shelf. You want it to be the same distance from the top all the way around. I have it about 1/4 inch from the top. Then I'm going to press gently to make sure that it's sealing down to that slipped surface. And then I'm going to come in and I'm just going to very gently blend that in. Once I have it blended in, I'm going to come in and I'm going to use the side of this tool to kind of straighten up the edges. I want this to all be very square. So it's flat on the top of the shelf and it goes straight down on the sides. So I want this to be straight down. So I'm going to use my tool to make sure that's straight. I want this part of the flange to go straight down and be nice and even and clean. And I want this little shelf on the flange to go straight across, like a little table or a little shelf. When the clay is still wet, like mine is right now, it's hard to finish this job really well. So I like to come in like a day after that I've made the lid and the flange, and just make some modifications to it, do the final cleanup, make sure it's nice and even. I'll even come in when it's a little more set up, and I'll come in underneath it and clean up underneath. But you really need to let that clay get a little bit more on the stiff side before you do the final cleanup. But you can see here, there's a nice little shelf about 1/4 inch below the edge of the hole of the lid. Now what I need to do is make this lid fit nicely into this space. And if you look right now, it doesn't fit, right? It sits up too high, and it's not quite the right shape. I need to make a little tab in the bottom of this guy. So the first thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna try to make sure I've got the right shape overall. So I might have to add a little clay or take a little clay off here and there, and I might need to do that as I complete this piece regardless. I'm gonna add a little bit of clay in a certain area where it looks like it kind of dips in, and I don't like that look. I want my lid to be a pretty symmetrical shape for what I've drawn here. When I'm picking the shape that I want my lid to be, I spend a lot of time thinking about what looks good with the anatomy of my animal or the object that my teapot is being made from or based upon. And so I had my lid kind of follow the ridges on the back and then have the same kind of front end as his nose. Once that shape is something that I like the looks of, now I'm going to work on making the little tab on the inside. Okay, so this is the tab that I'm talking about. What I'm going to do is carve a line about 1/4 inch all the way around that inside. And then I'm going to carve another line about 1/4 inch all the way around that outside edge. At this point, I want to take away this clay between those two lines. So I'm going to actually carve down and in now with my tool in this direction. And then I'll carve straight into the lid in this direction. And that should pull out this little corner of clay. All right, so I have a little tab that sticks down that's going to fit inside that shape that I built before. So you can see now it sits nicely into that shape. There's a little bit of extra room all the way around my lid, which is good. I want to maintain that. Up here at the top, I noticed that it fits kind of tight. You can see right here it's kind of a tight fit. So I'm going to loosen that up a little bit because the body of my frog will shrink more than the lid. And if the lid is a little tight right now, it's going to be too small when my teapot comes out of the kiln. So I'm just scraping away a little bit of clay on that tip till it fits. And that's looking pretty good. At this point, I'm going to make just a little ball of clay that I'm going to slip and score onto the top of my lid pole. Eventually in the step where I do details, I'm going to do a little bit more of an interesting shape for the lid pole because the little ball of clay takes no effort or thought to make, and it doesn't really do anything to my piece to make it more interesting. But right now it's going to serve the function of allowing me to take my lid on and off as it starts to set up. Now at this point, I'm just gonna work on cleaning up this edge. Be careful, this clay here is really thin. You don't wanna break it, so make sure you support it as you clean up those spaces. And remember, craftsmanship is always important in the work that we do. So if you see an error, like here I cut through, fix the error. When a person looks at your art, they should look at it and not notice like, oh, that doesn't look like that was quite well done. They should just see all of the interesting thought and unique ideas and textures and forms that you've put into it. You don't want them to see mistakes. So if you see a mistake, fix it. At this point, I have a beautiful little lid that fits into this space pretty well. I probably still have some trimming to do. I'm gonna let that set up just a little bit more and then I'll work on that trimming. And I've got a lid pull that's temporary that I can use to take this on and off. From this point forward, when you're working on your clay, you have to remember that you have a lid on your teapot. If you go to turn this over, make sure you pick up your lid. Otherwise, you're gonna turn this over upside down. Maybe you're working on cleaning up the bottom and you'll go to flip it over and that lid's gonna pop right off. So make sure you pay attention to the lid. Once your lid is finished, waiting for those last finishing touches, it's now time to work on all the little details of your teapot. For me, that's gonna be adding flower or petals to this lily pad or lily flower. It's gonna be adding texture to the whole piece and final touches to the nose and face of my frog. And last but not least, I'm gonna add toes to these little foot pads and texture to my lily pad. So it's all about detail at this point and putting in as much detail as I can to make this the most interesting piece that it can be.